Hey guys, what's going on? Seth here from retipster.com, and in this video I want to show you the results of what I experienced over this past month as I was going through the annual tax deed auction in the state of Michigan. So if this is your first time stumbling across this video where I'm talking about tax deed auctions, there's actually a series of videos that explains what tax deed auctions are, where you can find them, how you can sign up for them, how you can start bidding on properties, how you can sort of decide which properties you want to go after and where to find the best potential deals. So there's a lot more to the story than what I'm going to talk about right here in this video. If you do want to check out those other videos, and I strongly suggest that you do because there's a lot of good info there, I'm going to link to those beneath this video. So feel free to check those out. But with all that aside, assuming you've seen all that stuff, just a quick recap. So a tax deed auction is one of many potential opportunities you can take advantage of to possibly find really good deals on real estate. So in the United States, every property owner throughout the entire country has to pay property taxes. That's just a fact of life. And what happens if somebody decides to stop paying their property taxes, or if they forget to somehow, or if they can't afford it? Well, eventually, after a certain designated period of time, in some states that might be 1 year, in some states it's 2 years, in some states it's 5 years, but at some point in time, if they don't pay those property taxes, the county or municipality is going to come in and seize that property in tax foreclosure, and then they'll do one of two things. They'll either sell off a tax deed to that property, where they'll put it up for auction and other investors will bid on that and bid the price up, and whoever wins that auction literally gets a deed to the property. Like they own the thing outright. Or they'll sell off a tax lien to that property, where they're not necessarily selling off the entire property outright, but they're selling a lien to another investor. And whoever invests in that lien and buys it can either collect interest from the property owner if they ever pay off their taxes, or if that never happens, they can eventually potentially get the deed to the property at that point. But the downside with the liens is that it takes a while to get there, and it's not a direct path, and you don't really know if you're ever actually going to get the property. So that's kind of one of the drawbacks to that. But there's other reasons and advantages why an investor might want to pursue that approach. And that's not really what we're going to be talking about here. We're talking about the tax deed approach. And each one of the 50 states is set up in one way or another, or in some cases, kind of a strange combination of the two. And if you're curious what your state is, I'm actually going to link to a nationwide map showing you exactly what every single state is set up as. So if you're curious about that, go ahead and click on the link beneath this video and you can go explore that a little bit more. But again, we're going to be talking about the tax deed approach. And roughly half the states throughout the U.S. use the same kind of model. So the nice thing about tax deed auctions is, like I mentioned earlier, if you win one of these auctions, you're literally getting a deed to the property. And typically, the minimum starting bid for these auctions is just a little bit more than what the delinquent tax balance was for that property, maybe with some fees on top of it, just to compensate the county for their trouble in doing all this. But really, the county's main concern here is not to get rich off these properties. They just want their tax revenue. So that's what they're going to start at. And if nobody else bids on this property, or if there's just not enough interest, you could potentially buy one of these properties for nothing more than what that delinquent tax balance was. So that's like the rosy picture of it, but the reality of it, as you're about to see in this video, is that these kind of auctions, especially the ones that are auctioning off tax deeds, and especially when anybody is able to bid on these auctions online, are probably like the most competitive type of tax auction that there is, because there's such a low barrier to entry. Anybody can do it from anywhere in the world. You're getting an actual deed, so you don't have to like wonder if and when you're ever going to get the property. For a lot of reasons, it's very attractive for an investor to bid on properties like this. And because there's so many more people playing in this kind of game, it may look great when you see that minimum bid amount being so much less than what the property is actually worth. But as I've found, there are a ton of people who will absolutely bid this price higher and higher and higher and higher. Some cases so high that it's more than the property's even worth. It's like the opposite of what I would call a deal. And just the direction the world is going. I know in Michigan, for example, a lot of counties used to not have their tax deed auctions online at all. Like if you wanted to participate, you literally had to show up there in person. And because of that, that just naturally made a lot of potential competition not show up because they couldn't get there or they didn't want to spend their time traveling there. But now that literally every single county is online, I think this is the first year Michigan in particular has ever done this, it's just a lot easier for everybody to get involved. And I don't know how every other tax deed state is working, but I would imagine it's probably following a similar trend where a lot of these things, if they're not already online, they're going to be there. So just given how tax deed auctions are going, I mean, again, it's pretty convenient and nice to have them online. I actually kind of prefer that just for my own ease of use. But there's kind of a drawback to that too, and that is more competition. So anyway, in this video, I'm just going to show you my results. You can see all the properties I bid on. I'm also going to show you the prices that they ended up selling for. So let's jump into the computer. I'll show you the results. I'll show you all my discoveries and findings and conclusions and how I arrived at those conclusions. Okay, so here we are in my account. If you watched the previous videos in this little series, this should look pretty familiar to you. This is the website that hosts all of the county tax auctions throughout the entire state of Michigan. So as I'm recording this, all the county tax auctions have concluded. Everything is done. Anybody who was going to bid or win anything has done so. So now we're going to go and look at the past auction results. But once I decided which counties I wanted to participate in and which auctions I wanted to attend virtually and bid on properties, I was able to download all of those lists for those counties and go line by line through all the different properties that were going to come up for auction and decide which ones I wanted to bid on. And I was able to consolidate those all into one Google Sheet, which I've got right here. And this lists out each county and what date those auctions were going to be happening and which lots or properties I wanted to bid on. And the information I've got here for each property is the lot number. And that's important on this particular system because that was how I was able to look up each individual property and see the respective property listing. Then also what the current or minimum bid amount was. So this was the amount that I had agreed to bid on the property. And then the SEV, that's the state equalized value. And that's roughly half of what the county thinks the market value is, which again, is not the gospel truth, not necessarily accurate, but it's something to go by. And so essentially what I did was I set up a little equation in this column where I multiplied this number by 2 just so I could see this supposed market value number. And then the spread, this is column D here minus the current bid amount. So basically, if I were to win at this price, that's how much remaining equity I would have in the deal, or how much free real estate value or profit margin I would be walking away with. And over here, this is the results. So these are the prices that these properties actually ended up selling for. And as you can see, if we go out on a limb for a moment and assume that this market value number is actually correct and accurate, which it may be in some cases, it might not be in others, but if we just pretend that that's right, then this is telling us that the property ended up selling at a price that squeezed out most, if not all, of the profit margin, and in some cases sold at prices that were far beyond what the property was actually worth, according to that state equalized value. And this right here, I think, is actually really a good illustration of the problem with tax deed auctions, because as soon as you start getting competition involved, and especially when you're only looking at the best properties going up for auction, like the most highly desirable ones that have the biggest possible profit margin and meat on the bone, because again, that's what I was looking at and that's what I was willing to spend my time on. Those are really going to be the hardest ones to get at a price that's going to allow you to actually make money on the deal from the standpoint of a flipper who's just buying a property, doing nothing to it, and then trying to resell it for a higher price. And it looks like this one actually, I failed to put that sold price in there. So let's go check that out and see what this one sold for. So this was Van Buren County. We'll go and find that one. And that is right here. Or no, that's right. This one was actually Cass County. Something you'll notice with a lot of these auctions is that they grouped multiple counties into one auction date. And these are the counties that are like more rural with not as much going on. And that was the case here where they lumped together Cass County and Van Buren County. So if we go here, and this lists all the lots that had sold or that went up for auction. We'll search for lot 2111, and there we have it right there. So this one sold for $5,100. My minimum bid amount was $2,200. So this one actually could have possibly been a deal. This is actually one of the few examples that I think could have made sense had I stuck with it and had I really been willing to go to bat for this one. This was one of those lots that I was kind of on the fence about. Like, I wasn't terribly excited even at the current bid amount, because this particular property, it wasn't like anything to write home about. It was about an acre in size right next to the highway. It didn't have road access from the highway, but it did have kind of like some back road access, and it was just a simple residential lot. So like there was certainly some value to this, but it wasn't anything to like jump up and down about. Even so, this is one where I think there probably would have been some money-making potential, whereas most of these were not. There was so much competition that the final sold price was just way beyond anything that would have left enough value to make easy money on a vacant lot. So this one in particular, lot 9843, this is one that I think qualifies as an awesome property. Like it would have been pretty sweet to win this particular one. If we go down to it, I'll show you where it is. So this property was a huge 80-acre lot, all wooded land. It did have road access, and I sort of understand why it sold for that price, but is that the kind of price I could have paid for it and made money and sold it for even more? Absolutely not. I mean, maybe if I had some plan to develop it or subdivide it or turn it into something much better than just a vacant lot, possibly. But really, I think that market value actually was pretty accurate for what it was. And given that, I was actually willing to up my offer price to about $15,000 on this particular one. And I haven't actually updated this yet, so let me quick do that. So like $15,000, I think could have definitely worked. $20,000 probably could have worked as well. But then we're getting down to like more and more cash on the line. You better be right, that kind of thing. But just looking at this price, I mean, holy cow, like there wasn't even the slightest chance of getting this thing anywhere close to what I would call an actual deal. And a lot of these were like that, where they were bid up really close to the market value, if not beyond that in some cases. And I think part of what you have to keep in consideration if and when you want to bid on properties in this kind of auction format is what your intentions are with it. If this is a property that you want to use yourself, then certainly, I think it's worth bidding a little bit higher of a price. You don't have to only stick to like 10 to 30% of market value like I typically do when I'm going after a vacant land deal. If you know you can use it yourself, or if you do have a plan to develop it, or if you know the value is there and you can extract that in some way, then absolutely. Like it totally makes sense to bid it up higher, maybe even closer to its full market value, depending on what your end use is. But again, like through my perspective as a land flipper who's trying to buy properties very, very, very cheap so that it's pretty much a guarantee that I can make money on the back end without having to alter the property in any way. If you're somebody who's trying to get a property at 10 to 30% of market value like that, it's going to be really, really hard to do that at this type of auction. Not impossible. But if you do expect to get that kind of deal, then according to these results, I think you'll have to go after properties that either nobody else is that interested in bidding in because the property has some kind of problem with it, or a property that just isn't that valuable in the first place and people aren't clamoring to try to get that type of property. Like you can see right here, there was one particular instance of a property that just didn't sell at all, and the county thought it was worth $1,200. The minimum bid amount was $950, and it didn't sell at all. And I'll quick show you this property just so you can see what it is and why it ended up in this situation. So if we go over here to Lake County, 5439. So here it is right here. So this parcel is like, it's not useless. Like there's certainly something that can be done. It actually came with a couple of lots in this particular property. However, it generally takes 4 to 6 lots to have enough room to like obtain the permits to build, as you can see right here. And even without that, this is still the kind of place where you could park an RV. And I've actually owned properties in this neighborhood before, so I can confirm it's not that they're useless properties, they're just not amazing home run deals. That's not what you're getting in this kind of neighborhood. And I certainly didn't have the time to mess with this kind of thing right now. And apparently nobody else had the time to mess with it either. So again, like there's some value, it's just not amazing. Or there are other properties that do sell at a price that does make sense based on the market value, but usually there's some kind of problem with it, like it's in the middle of wetlands or it lacks road access or something like that. And I did notice that as the counties got more and more rural, like these two counties right here were in the Upper Peninsula, and there were a lot of counties in the UP that I didn't even mess with that I could have, but it's just so far away and so remote from where most of the buyers that I know are at, that it just didn't really make sense in my mind for me to mess with that. But I did notice that the more rural these properties got, the less intense the competition was. It was definitely still there, and it did still squeeze out a lot of the profit margin, but it wasn't as intense as some of these more populated counties in the Lower Peninsula. So that's just kind of my experience. And in terms of other properties that could have been deals, so just at a glance, it looks like this one could have worked because that number is still far below the actual market value and not that much higher than the lowest bid amount. And possibly this one might have worked, and this one could have possibly worked. I know this one was a property that actually did have wetlands on it, but it had a really nice view of Lake Huron, and it was located on an island, which would have made it kind of an interesting property to deal with. And this one as well could have possibly worked, as well as this one up here. And this one up here actually wasn't a vacant lot. It was a pretty nice sized parcel with a driveway and an old kind of rundown home on it that probably would have needed to be demolished. So like, I think the value probably would have been there for that one, but it had a house on it and I don't really want to deal with houses. So this one ended up on my list just from the standpoint of like, yeah, I would totally put down the minimum bid amount, which was $2,700 for what that property was. But once it started getting higher and higher and higher, it's like, that's not really my ball game. It's not really what I want to mess with. So I didn't keep pursuing it all the way down to the end. But if I was a house investor, there certainly could have been value there because I would have been willing and able and geared up to deal with the problems that those properties come with. So like there is opportunity, but it's not like super low hanging fruit and it's not without its problems. But I think if you're willing to seek out those particular types of deals and deal with those kinds of problems, then there could be some justification for spending your time here. It's just not quite the fit for my particular business model and the kinds of deals that I want to spend my time and money on. And as you're seeing this spreadsheet and you see, oh look, there's all kinds of opportunities. There's boom, 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 boom. And that's sort of true. But the thing is, with each one of these quote unquote missed opportunities, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll see that each one of them comes with a whole lot of baggage. Like I said, either there's a house that I don't want, or the property itself has some big issue with it. Like this one in particular has railroad tracks going through it. And this one right here was just kind of a really small lot without a whole lot of value to it. I honestly kind of question that market value there. I just don't think it was worth that. And this one down here had wetlands with it. Whereas these other ones up here that sold for way above their, supposed market value, there's a reason for that. It's because they were awesome properties. And those are really the kinds of properties that I want to go after. But it's really hard to do that because the competition kind of kills the opportunity. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope you're able to see where the opportunity is and isn't in this kind of auction. And maybe you can sort of self-classify whether or not this is something that you ought to be spending your time on. And just to explain the context of what kind of real estate investor I am and what my normal investing model is typically I'm buying vacant land properties and I'm contacting people who are either actively delinquent on their taxes, but they haven't lost the property yet, or the property isn't delinquent at all. It just happens to be a vacant land property that I'm looking to buy, and I make them a really, really low offer. And usually I'm able to get these properties from like 10 to 30% of their full market value. And with these kind of tax auctions, I don't want to say it's impossible to find that kind of deal, but like it's very, very rare. And if you're looking at only the cream of the crop best properties that are available in that tax deed auction in that county, I would almost go so far as to say it's impossible to find those kinds of deals on those kinds of properties at this type of auction, because the best deals are going to have a lot of competition, and the competition comes from all over the place because, like I said, it's really easy to throw your hat in the ring in this kind of an auction. If you even want to come within the same universe as that kind of deal, then chances are the property has to be either like a really flawed property, maybe it's landlocked or in a wetland zone, or has some other huge issue with it and nobody else wants it, and that's why nobody else is bidding up the price so high. Or it's got to be one that, along the same lines of having an issue with it, it's just really, really cheap. Like it's a super low value property. It's not that it's useless or you can't do anything with it, but it's just not that desirable in the first place. And if you do end up winning that auction, you can probably resell it and you can probably make some money, but it's not going to be a lot of money. The profit margin's either going to be really thin or it's just not going to be that high, which kind of begs the question, is it even worth your time to be messing with this? I don't want to say that like there's no opportunity here, but you need to go into this with the right expectations and understand what kinds of deals you're probably going to be able to get on certain types of properties. And also realizing that there are other ways to have a competitive advantage. Say if you have insider knowledge about a particular property, maybe you know what could be done with it that other people don't know, and therefore you can justify bidding the price higher because in your mind, you know it's actually worth more than what the assessor thinks it's worth because the assessor hasn't done all the research and they haven't thought through the other potential highest and best uses for this property. So like there are opportunities, but you have to be a little bit more creative and just aware of those opportunities. If you're just looking for an easy, buy it for super cheap, do nothing to it and flip it for a huge profit, that's what I think you're going to have a really, really hard time with in this kind of auction. And also, if you know me at all, you probably know that I'm not one to make big, bold, blanket statements about everything. Like this doesn't work, or that's not true, or there's no opportunity here. So there's just a few disclaimers and things that you should understand as you hear my final thoughts coming out of this. So first of all of my experience that I'm sharing here is strictly from the state of Michigan. And like any state, it has its own unique attributes. Michigan is a very different place than California versus Texas versus Ohio versus New York. So there can be some variances in what I'm saying that may or may not apply to other states out there. All the stuff that I'm saying here, I think there's definitely a lot of crossover in just things about this experience that do apply to other tax deed states, but still, it's not an apples to apples comparison in every sense. And also, at the time that I'm doing this, it's 2020, and the real estate market in Michigan anyway is on fire. I mean, property values are really high. There's a lot of construction going on. Real estate is definitely in demand right now. So that could have something to do with why the competition was so fierce and why it was so hard to find good deals. However, I will say I've done a little bit of this in times that were much worse, when property values were very low and there was not a lot of construction. And I actually had a pretty similar experience in that time as well. It's just that the prices of everything were lower, but that competition factor was still there. So I don't know that it's really that different, or if it's just kind of like the rising tide lifts the prices in general. So I think competition is always an issue. It's just a matter of what the final price is. But just so you know, all the results I'm talking about here were within the context of a very hot, competitive real estate market. So if you're watching this in a different point in time, where the market has crashed and values are in the toilet, then it could be different. And also, I would not say that I'm the most experienced person in the world at this particular type of strategy. There's probably things I don't know or that I'm missing. So don't look at me as like the ultimate expert. I'm just showing you the results from my real world experience. So I think there's a lot that both you and I can take away from this. But again, don't look at me as like Mr. Know-it-all expert who has all the answers, because I don't. This is just my limited experience, and while it was actually a pretty big downer that I didn't get any properties at this auction, I literally won nothing of all the properties that I bid on. On the same coin, looking back on it, I'm not terribly surprised because of the model that I follow and what I consider to be a deal. And just, the general expectation when you're going into any kind of an auction where there's a highly valuable property on the line and a lot of competition bidding on that, it's hard to really expect to get an amazing deal that way. So it is unfortunate that I wasn't able to pull any deals out of this, but at the same time, I don't really regret not getting a property. At the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is you don't buy properties just because you really want to buy a property. You buy a property because it's a really good deal and it's a slam dunk. And there were no slam dunks here. And I will say, just from an emotional buying standpoint, I'll be the first to admit, there were a number of cases here where I was looking at properties as the bids were actively going up, because on this website, you can see them change live. It's a lot like eBay. You can see the price going up, and then I would put my higher bid in there, and then I was instantly outbid by somebody else. I just kept thinking, man, what if I just did another $100 and another $100? Maybe the next time I'll get it. And all this time, the price is going higher and higher, and my profit margin is getting smaller and smaller. It's just really, really easy to let it get out of control. I imagine it's probably kind of like what gamblers feel when they're hooked into a gambling session and they just have to keep going. And maybe when they get around the next corner, maybe then they'll win it. Or maybe the next one. I can totally understand why some of these properties were bid up higher than their actual value. It's because people get hooked into this stuff. And I felt it myself. And I actually consider myself to be a pretty objective thinker in these situations where I don't really give into emotion. I can just think very much dollars and cents. Does this make sense? Yes or no? And I totally felt it. And there was one time in particular where I think I actually bid a little higher than I should have, but luckily somebody else outbid me. So I was able to get out of it. It's kind of a funny and sort of scary, dangerous thing in a way, just in terms of how you can kind of lose it and lose control if you're not really locked into whatever your maximum offer is. If you don't really know under no circumstances will I go above X number of dollars on this particular property. If you don't define that ahead of time, it's super easy to rationalize and kind of let the emotions take over. So if you're going to go after some of these auctions, just be very clear with yourself on what you believe the property is worth and what your maximum is going to be, and don't compromise on that, because that's really when people kind of get in trouble on this kind of thing. So thanks a lot for coming along on the journey with me. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. Hopefully you got a new perspective on how these things work and whether or not you want to spend your time trying to pursue opportunities here. Again, other opportunities? Probably. I had a pretty hard time finding them, and I think a lot of people will, unless they kind of go into it with the right expectations and the right angle, and they have some kind of an unfair advantage that other auction attenders don't have. If you want to learn more about this strategy, if you want to see the blog posts that I have associated with this video and the other videos in this series, head over to retipster.com. I'll have a link to those beneath this video if you want to go there directly. And also, if you're interested in getting actual great deals on vacant land properties or houses or any other type of property for that matter, I've got some much more effective strategies than what I've found the tax deed auctions to be. If you've tried this kind of tax deed auction approach and it kind of fell flat for you like it did for me, it's because it is kind of hard. There's a lot of competition, and there are definitely ways to avoid a lot of that competition and find these people before their property goes to tax foreclosure, or even when they're not delinquent on taxes at all. Just find people who are highly motivated to sell. Totally cut out the middleman of the county and get rid of all the excess competition and just get to the point and still get an amazing deal. Better than all the deals that I saw here, all the deals that I saw here on this tax deed auction. So if you want to check that out, head over to retipster.com. I'm going to have a link below to a lot of resources about the land investing business in general and how to find much better deals on land than what I was able to find here through this auction experience. So feel free to check that out. And now that we're at the end of this video, go ahead and check out these other videos that explain the land flipping life cycle. It really explains the whole business model that I follow when I'm looking for great deals on vacant land. You can also apply the same kind of thing to houses and other types of properties as well. So thanks again for watching and sticking with me through this, and I wish you all the best in your real estate investing journey. See you next time.